Now, in case you missed it, we are in the midst of a health crisis, and here are some statistics. I'm not going to dwell on too long of the awful truth. 70% of our country is overweight, 36% are obese. We have 10 million people, 10 million, who are morbidly obese. We have 24 million people at least with diabetes, and a quarter of them do not know it. In a generation, it is estimated that 86% of people will be either overweight, 51% obese. This is costing us $270 billion a year annually. And locally, a recent study showed that in Beaufort County, 43% of fifth graders were either obese or at serious risk of becoming so. And in Jasper County, this county, 58% of eighth graders were already obese or at serious risk of becoming so. Friends, we have to look into our hearts and find the will to change this situation. Because if we look into the hearts of our children, we will already find in some of them, as young as 3 years of age, the early signs of heart disease. In the movie Apollo 13, Commander Lovell, played by Tom Hanks, says, "People say it was a miracle going to the moon. It wasn't a miracle. We just decided to do it." Well, you have to say that with a few exceptions, as far as obesity is concerned, we haven't decided to do it. In fact, you could argue the opposite. For example, in the fashion industry, what once was a size 14 is now a more acceptable and politically correct size 10. So what are we going to do about this in our efforts to change this crisis? Well, I'm going to look at neuroscience because neuroscience is the way that individuals and collectively we can change our behavior. When I was in psychotherapy training back in the last millennium, it was all about your mother. Now it's all about your mother's neurotransmitters. Well, that's a slight exaggeration, of course, but we can learn from neuroscience. The first thing we need to know from neuroscience is that we are not logical people. We are psychological, often with the emphasis on the psycho. We are emotional beings with the ability to rationalize. And yet we continue to do programs that appeal to logic and rationality, which are low down on the list of motivators. So just giving information about nutrition alone isn't going to change people. That's like treating drug addicts by giving them the chemical structure of drugs. Awareness is helpful. It is a precursor for change, but it isn't change itself. It's the pre-game show, but it's not the game. So how do we change? How do we change? What do we have to do? We have to engage people at an emotional and an experiential level. Our brains, our primitive brains, really run the show, and we hope that periodically, more often than not, our newer brains, our prefrontal lobes, our frontal cortex, will exert some civilizing influence. So it's about information, and it's not about information, it's about emotion, and it's about experience. Now there's a cheeseburger. Man, is that a cheeseburger? That's the biggest cheeseburger I've ever seen. But let's imagine that that is your typical cheeseburger and it's 550 calories. You want some fries with that? Yes, that's another 600. Do you want a drink? Yeah, I'll have a shake, 16 ounce, that's 600 calories. So what happens if we change the information and try to make it more impactful? I have discovered that there is a direct neural pathway from the emotional limbic areas of your brain right into your wallet. So if we change these into a cent a calorie, let's call these Rankin dollars, and say, let's look at these foods in terms of a cent a calorie. A cheeseburger is $5.50, the fries are $6, the shake's $6. That meal, 1,750 calories or $17.50. Okay, so how many people, knowing that there are 1,750 calories in that meal, are really going to change their behavior? Yeah, a few perhaps. How many people would change their behavior if they actually had to pay $17.50 for that meal? Let's look at something else. Let's look at calorie expenditure. Let's say the average person, about 180 pounds, burns about 100 calories a minute. If you're a little less than that, we're being generous to you. So you want to burn off the calories in that cheeseburger, you've got to walk 5.5 miles. The fries, you've got to walk 6. The milkshake, another 6. So you have to walk 17.5 miles if you want to burn off that food. Now, how many people, knowing the fact that you have to walk 17.5 miles, actually would change their behavior? Yeah, a few perhaps. But how many would change their behavior if they had to actually walk the 17.5 miles? There is a difference between just giving information and creating an experience and an emotion for people. That's how people change. So your brain is not your consciousness. Your brain is not your consciousness. Okay? You like to think that it is, but it isn't. So just because you wake up one morning and decide, today is the day that you are going to quit smoking, stop drinking, change your eating habits, the big question is, why should your brain listen to you? Okay? You have trained it. It's not going to be that easy just because you've decided. In fact, in many ways, even though we experience our actions, we think we have conscious control of them, and sometimes we really don't. It's not just about telling people. It's about engaging them, as we've seen by Kelly earlier today, how you have to engage people. It's not just information. Now, I happen to believe that you can't exercise much conscious control of your behavior if you don't have a balanced brain. Balance is something that we look for in all aspects of our life. It's elusive. St. Augustine said, total abstinence is easier than perfect moderation. He was talking about sex, of course, but he's right, okay? He's right. So you can't talk people out of a balanced, if they have an unbalanced brain. You can't talk them out of an unbalanced brain. If you go up to a friend of yours who's depressed and you say to him, oh, come on, cheer up. Like, look at all your blessings. Life could be, life could be a whole lot worse. Is that going to change them? No, it's going to make them worse because they can't feel better. And you better watch out because if they can muster the effort, they might smack you in the mouth, right? You can't talk people out of an unbalanced brain. Information is not enough. So how do you change a balanced brain? Well, you can change a balanced brain a number of ways. One is through medication, and another is through specific brain training. I'm going to talk a little bit about brain mapping. We have the capability of actually looking at how balanced a brain somebody has. And when we do brain mapping, we look at the neurological activity in the brain. We look at the measures of magnitude, how much activity is going on, measures of dominant frequency and connectivity. And this enables us to look at the ratios between different brain waves. This is technical stuff, but what I'm saying is it's very easy to look at the brain and see how well balanced it is. Here is an example of a balanced brain. If you actually look at this legend here, you see that this is a measure of activity at different sites of the brain. If you look here, you can see yellow is very high, red is high, green is okay compared to a normative database of your peers, blue is low, and dark blue is very low. If you look at this brain map, you see by and large, this person's brain is pretty balanced. It falls within the normative limits. You look at this map and you say, oops, there's a little problem here, okay? You see there's very high areas over here in this alpha section and in this delta section. In fact, this is a brain map of an 8-year-old child with ADD. We can see that this area of the brain is very highly active, and when you look at the ratio between alpha and beta, it is a very, very reliable way of measuring attention deficit disorder. So we actually have objective measures at looking at how balanced a brain is and how you do something about that. Now, so there's medication and there's brain training, and brain training looks at, uses neurofeedback to actually change the brain. So for example, right here on the left-hand side, you see here's a brain, an alpha brain, with somebody's activity, and you can see that it's pretty low. And there, after we've done some neurofeedback, which is brain biofeedback using some simple principles, you can see that the activity on the right side has changed. So we are able to change people's brains using not just medication, but also neurofeedback and biofeedback training. Here's another example looking at beta activity in the brain. Beta activity in the brain is associated with information processing. And again, you can see over here, it's pretty low. After some neurofeedback training, it becomes more balanced and normal. So a balanced brain becomes very important if we want people to take information, take advice, and actually be able to act on it. Now, there are other things that change the balanced brain, and those are key lifestyle behaviors, and you know what I'm going to talk about, right? When I talk about key lifestyle behaviors, one is, of course, exercise. Exercise is the single biggest thing you can do to balance your brain. Exercise is the single biggest thing you can do to balance your brain. Any client who comes to me in my general clinical psychology practice, I don't care how old they are, what they're complaining of, I want to put them on an exercise regimen. Because unless their brain is balanced, it doesn't matter how clever I am and how much brilliant advice I've got, it's not going to make much of a difference. It's going to be all words. Exercise, the single biggest thing you can do to balance your brain. Next one, stress management. When we have stress management, our brain is on information overload. We live in an overstimulated world, and we need to be able to relax that brain and get out of information processing into what's called relaxed wakefulness. So you know the sorts of things you need to do: yoga, meditation, prayer. It is really important. We live in an overstimulated world, and we do not balance our brains. A lot of us feel as if we're not in information processing mode, we're not being effective, we're being unproductive, we feel guilty. A balanced brain is not information processing frenzy, and that's what we live in right now. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at how the brain requires energy, and in information processing, we require a lot of energy. Your brain is 2% of your body and needs 25% of the energy that your body has. And there are two ways your brain can get energy. One is it can go into your body and draw it yourself, or it can go straight to the food source. Now you can see what will happen if you go straight to the food source. And we have trained ourselves to do that. Obviously, sensible nutrition is important. Your brain's energy is about nutrition. And your nutrition will feed your brain either appropriately or inappropriately and will give it energy or deprive it of energy with all the consequences that happen. The fourth thing is sleep. Poor sleep leads to poor energy, leads to lethargy, less exercise, lower mood, poor concentration, poor cognitive function. Poor sleep is severely underestimated. So, those are ways we balance our brain. And here at Mindstream, the things that we do for our students are exactly that. We do use brain mapping and neurofeedback to help balance their brain. We do show them and give them the healthy lifestyle behaviors. And we do very specific behavioral training on health skills. You can do that. You know, you can't tell people to have self-control, but you sure as heck can train it. So there are ways of training people so they are more receptive and training our teens. Now, the brain is also a social brain. What we see other people doing is a huge influence on our behavior. It's what we call social proof. No man is an island, and those who want to be are more Alcatraz than Hilton Head, okay? We like to think of ourselves as rugged individualists, but in fact, we're programmed to be copycats. And we just saw in that video about how to start a movement. So what we see going on around us is a huge influence on us. So we have to change the culture. We have a culture where 70% of people are overweight, and we live in a fat culture. We have to change that. If we don't change it, this is like a massive, morbidly obese snowball going down a very steep and long hill. We really need to change, not just the culture, but we need to train our youth, because youth are the best opportunity we have for changing this, and they deserve it. We owe it to them to change. But we're not doing it. Tennessee Williams, in A Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, really exposed denial really well, where one character says to another, who's hiding a secret, when something is festering in your memory or imagination, the laws of silence don't work. That's like locking a house that's on fire and pretending it's not burning. Not facing a fire doesn't put it out. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for all of us to face the fire and put it out before it affects not just this generation, but every successive one. Thank you so much.
How exciting to be here. What I want to try and do today is add to the amazing lineup of speakers today by bringing the brain into our discussion of the creative spark. And I want to do that by telling you about some of the newest research that I've been doing in my neuroscience research lab at New York University, asking the question, can aerobic exercise, that is, can going to the gym actually improve your learning, memory, and cognition? I also want to address the question of whether increased aerobic exercise can also make you more creative. Now, I remember the day that I realized I wanted to become a neuroscientist. I was a freshman at UC Berkeley, and I was taking a freshman seminar class with just 10 or 15 of us called The Brain and Its Potential, taught by Marion Diamond. She was standing at the front of the classroom, and up there at the front, she had this beautiful hat box. And with her gloved hands, she opened that hat box, and out she pulled a real, live, fixed human brain. Now, it was the very first time I'd seen a human brain, and what she told us was that what she was holding in her hands was the most complex structure known to mankind. It's the only structure that can think about itself. And one of the most amazing things about the brain is that it can change as a function of the environment. It can learn, it can grow. And I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard in my whole life. And I didn't know it that day, but that idea of the brain and its potential and what's called neuroplasticity, the ability to change as a function of the environment, was going to become my life's work in science. And that's what I want to tell you about today. So I started out studying a structure in the brain called the hippocampus, really important for long-term memory. But more recently, I've become interested in how exercise can actually improve our learning, memory, and cognition. And I got interested in that not because I read a paper or went to a talk. I went to the gym. When I turned 40, I decided I wanted to get in the best shape of my life, and I went to the gym. And the class that I found that kept me coming back to the gym on a really regular basis was a class called Intensati, developed by this amazing fitness instructor named Patricia Moreno in New York City. Now, Intensati is unique because it takes physical movements from kickbox, dance, yoga, and martial arts, but the unique part is that it pairs each physical movement with a positive spoken affirmation. What do I mean by that? So in Intensati, we don't just punch, we say, I am strong now, and the class says it back to you. So what happens is that you not only get that great aerobic exercise, but because you're speaking out, you actually get an increase in aerobic output, and it makes you feel great. So the bottom line was I got in great shape, but there were two amazing benefits that I noticed. One was that I had this amazing motivation. I felt like $1,000,000 after I came out of this class, and I couldn't wait to go back. And I thought, my gosh, Patricia Moreno is an amazing teacher to instill that kind of motivation. And then I thought, well, wait a second, I'm a teacher. I wonder if my students feel that way after my neuroanatomy class. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The second amazing benefit was that when I went back to work, when I started doing Intensati, I was writing a lot of grants, and I noticed that as I got more regular with the workouts, my writing got easier. I was able to make associations better. I was able to focus better. And I thought, this is amazing. I want to look at the neuroscience literature to understand what's going on. And I looked at the literature, a lot of new studies coming out, as well as looking at some of the older studies that had led to our current understanding. And when I looked at those, I found a very familiar name. That name was Marion Diamond. So she was not only my undergraduate advisor, but she was a real pioneer in neuroscience research and really one of the only women working in this field back in the late 1950s and 60s when she discovered that when you raise rats in what she called an enriched environment with lots of toys to play with, lots of other rats to play with, and they run around a lot, and you compare their brains to rats raised in what she called an impoverished environment with no toys, just a couple of rats in a small box. What you can do is measure their brain. You measure actually the thickness of that outer covering of their brain called the cortex. And what she found is that the rats raised in enriched environments had cortices that were actually thicker. Their brain grew as a function of this enriched environment. And later studies showed that exercise, the increased exercise that those rats were getting because they were running around a lot more, was a big factor in that brain change. So I thought, okay, this is an area that I really want to get to know. And as a professor, the best way to get to know a topic area is to teach a class. So I decided I'm going to teach a class at NYU called Can Exercise Change Your Brain? And I decided because I got inspired to do this because of exercise, I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could bring exercise into the classroom and not only teach students about what exercise is doing to their brain, but also teach them, kind of have them experience what exercise felt like. So I thought I could do this. So I decided to go to the gym, and of course, I loved Intensati. So I became a certified Intensati instructor and a certified fitness instructor. And I could tell you, oh, it was so hard. I was teaching classes, I was writing grants. But the truth is, it was so much fun. It was really fun because I got to learn a whole new way to move, a whole new way to motivate students. And at the same time, I stayed in great shape. So there was nothing better. So I had this class. I was going to teach an hour of aerobic exercise. I trained for 6 months to be able to teach in front of this class. I'd never done this before, but I thought it'd be fun. So teach an hour of aerobic exercise, an hour of Intensati, followed by an hour-and-a-half lecture on the effects of exercise in the brain. But then I realized I had my first study right there. My students could be my subjects in my first study. All I had to do was test them cognitively at the beginning, at the end of the semester, and compare their performance to a class that didn't exercise and ask whether, in fact, exercise could improve their cognitive performance. So that's exactly what I did. And before I tell you what our prediction was and what our results were, I just want to take you back for a moment to September 7th, 2009, which was the first day of this Can Exercise Change Your Brain class. And it's seared in my memory, mainly because I was really scared and nervous. I give many, many lectures. I love giving lectures, but this one I was very nervous. Why? Because my goal was to actually try and inspire these kids to love exercise in the way that Patricia Moreno inspired me, but also inspire them to love neurobiology and the brain and plasticity the way that Marion Diamond inspired me. So I had a pretty high bar, and I was pretty scared to step out in front of that classroom. But I have to say, I think the students were a little bit scared too. They'd never come to a class where the instructor came in workout clothes. They'd never sweated in front of their professor. And I got a lot of nervous laughter when I told them that they were going to have to say positive affirmations. No, not say, yell positive affirmations in class. But I have to say, it was the most memorable first class that I've ever taught. The students really got into it. Okay, there was a little bit of nervous laughter and a lot of giggling, but they really got into it. They were shouting the affirmations. They were really going all out in the workout. And the best thing is that motivation and that inspiration oozed over into our our lecture part, and they remained engaged, asked lots of questions. It was a fantastic first class and a fantastic semester. So what did we find? So our prediction goes back to that structure that I said was important for long-term memory, the hippocampus. It goes back to the hippocampus because the hippocampus is one of only two brain structures where new brain cells, new neurons are born. So you and I have shiny new hippocampal cells being born in our hippocampus. But the cool thing is that experimental studies in animals have shown that increased aerobic exercise can actually enhance the birth of those new hippocampal neurons and make them live even longer. So our prediction was that this increase in aerobic exercise in my NYU students would actually improve their learning and memory, improve their ability to learn new pieces of information, and improve their ability to retain those new pieces of information. Did we find that? Well, we tested them on a whole battery of different cognitive tests. And what we found was one significant improvement in my class. And that improvement was in the ability to encode new long-term memories. What task was that? It was a complicated task. It was actually a quite difficult task. Students were given a really complex geometrical image. It was like an Etch-a-Sketch image. And then after a delay, they would have to discriminate between that Etch-a-Sketch image and one that looked very, very similar to it. My students got significantly faster at identifying the correct image that they saw before. So they're able to separate out things that are coming in your memory. For example, you're meeting lots of new people here today. And so you might be better if you exercise and come to my class at differentiating between the faces of different people that you meet today. So that's a very, very useful thing to be able to do. So is this new? What is new about this? Well, it's new and exciting because I have to say we are certainly not the only people, my lab is not the only lab interested in the effects of exercise. But the majority of the work has been done on looking at the effects of exercise in the elderly population. Why? Because cognitive decline is a major health issue in the elderly, not to even mention Alzheimer's disease. The exciting news in the elderly population is that increased aerobic exercise has clearly been shown to improve cognition. So that's great, but the idea there is that there's decline already, so you have a little bit of room to see improvement. What about my healthy, young, very smart NYU neuroscience majors? They're at the peak of their cognitive abilities, as are you and I. Could exercise actually help us? Our studies suggest that yes, they can. Now, we're not only interested in in learning, memory, and cognition, but there's a really exciting link to the topic of today's conference, that is creativity. And that comes from one of the newest directions of study of the hippocampus. We've known for a very, very long time that exercise can improve, that the hippocampus is important for long-term memory. But recent studies have suggested the hippocampus is also important for creativity and imagination. Why? Because patients with hippocampal damage have significant impairments at being able to imagine new situations. So we ask a patient with hippocampal damage, describe for me a tropical beach scene. They've never been to a tropical beach. They have a significant, they can't barely say anything about sand or water, whereas a control subject would be able to tell you about the white sand and the corona in their left hand with the umbrella in it, all these different details. So the idea is the hippocampus is not only important for putting new associations in mind that help you remember the events like this in your past, that will be in your past, but also important for putting new concepts together in unique ways, the basis of both creativity and imagination. So what we want to do, we haven't done this, is to look at the effects of exercise not only on learning memory, but on increased creativity as well. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is simple. Increased aerobic exercise can improve learning, memory, and possibly creativity. What's more to know? Everybody wants a magic pill to get smarter. Well, this isn't a pill, and it comes with a lot more sweat than a pill, but it can help you. It's free. It helps you every day. And our goal over the next 10 years is trying to figure out exactly how that's helping, what exactly is changing in the brain. So I only have one question for you. Who wants to go to the gym? Anybody? Okay, great. Thank you.